Was it last week?
Yes, sir.
So recent private sector and spent the last couple of years at the Pentagon and Office of Strategic Capital.
Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you.
I'm getting used to it, so I'd ask you to bear with me. This is my first time where I'm speaking on my own behalf, so I'm kind of excited about this, but please, would love the feedback if I screw it up. In the conversation we've heard so far, we've heard a lot about kind of the state of play of how things are. And what I want to kind of talk to you about is a little bit of a side shift, and I'm really going to be kind of a connector between now and the next panel, which is talking about economic security, which I think will be interesting. A lot of great people on that panel, excited to hear about that. The last couple years, we, the DoD, and really the whole of government from the US side, working with our allies and partners, has been focused on the technologies that do the things that you've been hearing over the last couple of conversations. We can't communicate without the new technology, and we can do it better if we get better technology. And we're finding more and more that these technologies are not just things that we procure, we build, we research, and we develop on our own. We're finding, it used to be that 80% of R&D in the US was the Department of Defense. That 20% would come from the private sector, and we were kind of the driver of that. That's no longer the case. It's swapped. 80% of research and development is now coming from the private sector. And so for us to keep up with technology as it continues to advance, we have to be aware of it, and we have to work with private capital and the technology developers themselves and meet them where they are to be partners and not just customers, if that makes sense. In those conversations, I heard something last night that I thought was interesting. There's countries out there, like I think of, like the US, that are innovators. There's countries out there that are regulators. And then there's countries out there that are duplicators. And we see this a lot with a lot of the technologies that we've developed in the US being duplicated or replicated by the PRC, by China. And that's seeing a lot of those technologies stealing the intellectual property, taking those things, utilizing tools of both just kind of figuring it out and taking it, and also leveraging the economic to take those technologies, run those companies in the ground, steal the IP through espionage or other types of scenarios. In those conversations, and I heard on the panel earlier, we talked about there being the powers that be in the world wanting to loan money to the poorest in the world to take advantage of the situation to make themselves more wealthy. And I think that resonates. But I think that is maybe not fully baked out with some of the things that have come along in the last couple years with regards to this. We've heard a lot about Belt and Road and different initiatives along those ways. We've heard the term debt trap diplomacy, where it looks really good up front until you have to pay the bill, and then they take all your stuff, and that's not really a great deal for anybody, especially anyone in this room. And so we've had to look at that wild-eyed, and we'd have to come at that and look at economic security is national security. And as that relates to technology, if we don't have the ability to access the greatest technology in the world, and that's not just on the shores of the US, that's throughout our allies and partners, then we're going to lose. We're going to fail because technology is accelerating at a speed that we can't keep up with by just doing what we've always done. And so I think that's really kind of important to set the stage for that and why that's so important when we talk about this. For the last 50 years, when we've talked about the economic instrument of power with regards to the Department of Defense, we just buy things. We buy fighter jets. We buy aircraft carriers. We don't buy the things in them. That becomes problematic when we can't access the microprocessors or when we ground the F-35s because of the rare earth magnets that are in them. Because no one in the DoD buys a rare earth magnet. That's problematic if we expect the people that are providing us, the primes, if you will, in this case, to provide us with the technologies we need to go fight and win wars, and we can't access it because they're grounded. I think everyone in this room can realize the value of supply chains. Even my mom knows this now, that when you don't have toilet paper, that's a problem. Supply chains matter, and it's real to people. And that's not just for toilet paper and things that we work in our day-to-day, but it's cars. We saw that what microprocessors do to new cars coming online. So these technologies, especially these component-level technologies, are critical to the future of national security and really our societies at large. With that being said, we have to find ways to leverage the competitive advantage we have, which is, from this perspective, the private capital markets. Because if our private capital allocators are not going to make the investments in these technologies companies are going to go bankrupt, and all the IP and all the technology they create is going to be stolen and taken and replicated in the conversation we had earlier. So that means that we need to meet people where we are. And to the comment earlier about putting debt into the poorest of the countries to take advantage of the situation, one of the things that I think we've really focused on when we've talked about how do we work in this space to be different is that we don't want to be China to beat China. And I think that really resonates with this conversation of how do we come in a way that helps be the catalyzing event that brings private capital allocators into countries that need help, that have the technology, that have the innovative mindset, that have the ability to bring technologies to bear that are going to be better for the whole of society across our allies and partners, but do that in a way that makes it a partnership, not a predatory type of scenario. And those are the type of programs we've been working on here within the U.S., as well as working with partners around the globe, where we think that globalization with supply chains in a way has turned into friends and alliesization. And that means that it's fine that we can tap into those supply chains if those are friends and allies and people that we trust, because they're going to provide the competitive advantage that comes with trade and comes with being an ally. But with that, if we have a lot of conversations we've seen with regards to how do we combat China in this space, specifically in the technologies over the last couple of years, has been tariffs, has been FIRMA, has been CFIUS, has been stick-based approaches to tell people, specifically private capital allocators and technologists, what they can't do. And we haven't provided them with a reason to be our partner. I mean, I have two girls, 12 and 14. And if I just provide sticks to all of my discipline, if I just beat them every day, I'm not going to have the right. I have to come with candy. You have to come with the carrots and sticks that come alongside with it. And I think the alignment of incentives that come with that is as true in this conversation as it is in being a parent. And I think with that, I spent a year at the Development Finance Corporation. For those of you who have not heard of the Development Finance Corporation, which I hadn't when I started there, it is about a $60 billion bank that has loans, loan guarantees, equity, insurance, and reinsurance that was stood up in 2018 in the BUILD Act to make sure we continue on our developmental in the low and low to middle income countries, but it also had a national security mandate to make sure that we were countering BRI in a way that was true and authentic to the U.S. and the morals and the values that we believe in. The Export-Import Bank, another scenario that is out there working on the exports from the U.S., but also has a big focus on how do we counter the influence of what the PRC has been doing to the technologies that are critical to the nation and to national security. From there, I asked the question in 2020 when we were working through COVID, we were standing up the Defense Production Act loan program at the Development Finance Corporation. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of acronyms, and I apologize, and I'm happy to take questions here afterwards, but what it was is to work on how do we leverage these types of debt-based tools to work on that. And we asked the question, why is the DoD the only department in the federal government that doesn't use loans? We just buy stuff. That's not efficient for like any funding stream. It doesn't align for incentives to make a partnership, and it puts us at a competitive disadvantage when we want to make sure we access these technologies. And so it's been a slog, but over the last couple of years, and thanks to our members of Congress in the last year, for the first time in 2024, the Department of Defense now has a federal credit program called the Office of Strategic Capital, and it has about $1 billion in its first years to allocate in the form of loans to attract and scale private capital for national security with regards to these technologies. I say this not as a what to do. I say this as an example of the tools that are starting to become into the toolbox of national security that include economic security other than buying things, that have allowed us to really tap into the resources that are already out there in the private sector and give us a competitive advantage to work with these technologists. I also spent time at AFWorks, which it's the Air Force's seed funder for technologies. We kind of seed fund technologies with grants, and last year we put about $1 billion out to about 1,800 companies. So some small down to 50,000, some up to about $30 million matching with private sector grants through the partnership with the Small Business Administration. And that's all great. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of money out there. But the statistic I want you to hear here is that of those 1,800 companies, 70% of those technology companies had never worked with the Department of Defense or anyone in the government before. So what that's really starting to drive is these early stage companies that are the technologists that are driving the technology and changing the future of the world are now starting to see the government as a partner from the very infancy of their creation. That allows them to know when there's times to work with the government and it's mutually beneficial, and there's times it's not beneficial. And everywhere in between. And so I think that those are kind of programs I would point to that have been very effective in accessing this technology that are critical to the future of national security for not just our country, but for our allies and partners and many of the people in this room. And look forward to taking any questions or happy to dig in deeper if anybody has anything more. Thank you guys for your time.